What Xi, I think, is looking for is what he calls the Chinese dream, is really the reimposition of something that looks quite like communist rule, not capitalism, or if you want to be more historic-minded, quite like old imperial China, say from the Qin dynasty of the 2nd century BC.
Welcome to another Breakout with breaking views brought to you by PGIM. I'm Rob Cox coming to you from Milan, speaking to Edward Chancellor in the UK. Eddie, you've written a column about Evergrande. You've basically said that this Chinese property company is all of China's economic ills in one company. Elaborate a little bit further. What are those ills?
Premier Wen Jiabao, about 13 years ago, commented on China's economy being unbalanced and unsustainable. And I think the point is that even when made that comment then, there were already signs that there was too much debt in China's economy, that it was that the growth was driven by excessive investment and excessive credit. President Xi Jinping has been aware of this for a while, and in particular, he's been aware that the property bubble was at the center of China's unbalanced economic growth. And what's interesting is that a few years back, Wen said he was particularly infuriated by the large numbers of millions of vacant properties held in China, kept empty in China by investors. And Wen said, Xi said that the property houses were for living in, not for speculation. And nobody paid any attention. And then last year, during the pandemic, the housing market, China's housing market, soared again, going up, I think, more than 15% over the course of the year. And towards the end of that year, I think Xi took a decision saying enough was enough. And it was then that he introduced the so-called 3 red lines to limit property developers' use of leverage. And those 3 red lines, as you know, are what have in the end brought Evergrande, China's largest property developer, with some $300 billion of debts, to its knees. And my thinking is that this is a deliberate attempt by Xi to burst the housing bubble.
Okay, so he's bursting the housing bubble. He's in this buildup of excess investment. But where does he take the economy? So if we're going from a bubble economy, what's the sort of next version of that? Is it socialism with Chinese characteristics, or is it just a sort of Xi Jinping absolute authority economy? What does that look like?
Well, Rob, I think before you get to that point, you have to consider the risks of bursting the bubble. And as I say in my piece, no significant real estate bubble has ever been burst in the past without a severe economic downturn, and often a financial crisis to boot. And think, the poster child for that is Japan, I'd say, right? Japan's bubble economy that was deliberately burst in the late in 1989 by the Bank of Japan, and then Japan had its banking crisis and so-called lost decade. Now, I think Xi thinks 2 things. First of all, he thinks I can control the bubble burst better than Japan. And what they do in China is that when a company, private company or any company has losses, those losses tend to get shuffled around the system. That's what the Chinese are extremely good at doing. And Xi can choose where those losses appear. We call that red capitalism. So I think he thinks he can deflate the bubble and the bad debts produced by the bubble in a better way than Japan. The other thing is, I think he has a vision of the future. He doesn't want China's economy to be driven anymore by excessive investment and excessive credit. The China 2025 development plan is for Chinese to lead in a whole load of new technologies, from artificial intelligence to aeronautics, biotechnology, and so forth. And I think if you look at what Xi has been doing in recent years, he's been developing a system of social credits that seem to sort of run alongside normal credits. If you behave well, you're allowed to, you get priority access onto a plane. If you behave badly, you suddenly can't get onto one of these high-speed trains. He's developing a digital yuan in which every transaction by the individual would be followed by the state. In China now, there are some 600 million surveillance cameras, all electronically connected together, feeding a huge amount of big data. So I think what Xi, is looking for is what he calls the Chinese dream, is really the reimposition of something that looks quite like communist rule, not capitalism, or if you want to be more historic minded, quite like old imperial China, say from the Ming dynasty of the 16th century, or if you want to go really far back to the Qin dynasty of the the 2nd century BC. So in other words, a very authoritarian type of economic model that I think we can no longer describe as capitalistic or marketized.
So what are the implications for foreign investors in China?
Well, I think they're scary. I think immediately the consequences of the bursting of the housing bubble are deflationary. I mean, that's, if you remember, what we learned from the sort of Lehman bust. I think that there's a possibility, if the central bank tries to offset these deflationary forces, that by printing a lot of money, that the renminbi will crack on the foreign exchanges. And if that happens, then I think, as I say in the piece, we're going to unleash another trade war. So those are sort of immediate consequences, and I'd throw in the fact that raw material prices globally are likely to suffer. But I think longer term, Western investors have to consider how protected are they going to be in Xi's surveillance state. And we've seen over the course, over the course of recent months, Alibaba, Didi, the education companies last week, the cryptocurrencies, whatever doesn't fit with Xi's plan gets whacked, and gets whacked sort of pretty big time. So yeah. I think that the what we used to call the China dream, the dream of Western investors, that they can make huge amounts of money from the potentially vast China market. This is a dream that comes about, it thrived in the 1930s. It comes and goes. And since the opening of China in 1979, the China dream has been alive. I think that China dream has come to an end, and it is to be replaced by Xi Jinping's Chinese dream. And the Chinese dream is an authoritarian, collectivist, and fundamentally anti-capitalist vision.
All right. Well, thank you, Eddie, for your insights into that. We'll be back with another breakout from Breaking Views next week.